Picture this. You're standing at the helm of a ship, navigating through a stormy sea. Waves crash against the hull, threatening to throw you off course. The wind howls, making it difficult to hear your own thoughts. In this moment of chaos, you might feel helpless, like you've lost control of your own destiny. But what if I told you that the key to weathering life's storms has been around for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered? Throughout this video, we'll embark on a journey through the rich history and transformative teachings of Stoicism. We'll explore its origins in ancient Greece, delve into its core principles and values, and discover how to apply its wisdom to our daily lives. Along the way, we'll meet some of the most influential figures in Stoic philosophy, from Zeno, the founder of the school, to Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher who embodied its ideals. So, are you ready to take the helm of your own life? To learn how to navigate the stormy seas of existence with grace, wisdom, and courage? Then, join us on this exciting exploration of Stoicism and discover the timeless wisdom that has been transforming lives for centuries. Get ready to embark on a journey of self-discovery and personal growth as we unlock the secrets of this powerful philosophy together. Imagine a bustling marketplace in ancient Athens, where merchants, philosophers, and ordinary citizens mingle amidst the clamor of commerce and the exchange of ideas. It's here, in the heart of one of the world's most vibrant intellectual centers, that the story of Stoicism begins. The year is 301 BCE, and a young merchant named Zeno of Citium has just arrived in Athens after surviving a shipwreck. According to legend, Zeno wandered into a bookshop where he encountered the works of Socrates and other philosophers. Moved by their wisdom, he decided to devote himself to the study of philosophy, eventually establishing his own school, the Stoics. But Zeno was just the beginning. Over the centuries, Stoicism would attract some of the most brilliant minds of the ancient world, from Seneca, a wealthy statesman and advisor to emperors, to Epictetus, a former slave who became one of the most influential teachers of his time. Perhaps the most famous Stoic of all was Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled from 161 to 180 CE and whose private journals, known as Meditations, remain a timeless guide to living a life of virtue and resilience. So, what was it about Stoicism that appealed to such a diverse range of individuals, from emperors to slaves? At its core, Stoicism offered a way of navigating the challenges of life with wisdom, courage, and self-mastery. In a world where war, disease, and political upheaval were a constant threat, the Stoics taught that true happiness could be found within by cultivating a strong character and a clear mind. Central to this philosophy was the idea that we should focus on what is within our control, rather than worrying about external events or the opinions of others. As Epictetus famously put it, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. By mastering our own thoughts and emotions, the Stoics believed that we could achieve a state of inner peace and equanimity, even in the face of adversity. But Stoicism was more than just a self-help philosophy. It was a comprehensive system of thought that encompassed ethics, logic, and natural philosophy. The Stoics believed in the unity of all things and saw the universe as a rational, orderly system governed by a divine logos or reason. By living in accordance with this natural order, they believed that we could achieve a sense of harmony and purpose in life. As we explore the core principles and values of Stoicism in the next section, we'll see how these ancient ideas continue to resonate with modern audiences, offering a powerful toolbox for personal growth and resilience. From the bustling marketplaces of ancient Athens to the challenges of the 21st century, the wisdom of the Stoics remains as relevant as ever. So, Get ready to dive deeper into this fascinating philosophy and discover how you can apply its timeless insights to your own life. Core principles and values of Stoicism. Picture a tranquil garden where a group of students gather around their teacher, hanging on every word as he shares the wisdom of the Stoics. The teacher is Epictetus, a former slave who has become one of the most sought-after philosophers of his time. As he speaks, he distills the core principles and values of Stoicism into a simple yet profound message. The chief task in life is simply this: to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control. At the heart of Stoicism lies a powerful idea that true happiness and fulfillment come from within, from cultivating virtue and mastering our own thoughts and emotions. The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. By living in accordance with these virtues, they believed that we could achieve a state of eudaimonia, or flourishing, regardless of our external circumstances. But what does it mean to live virtuously? For the Stoics, it meant using reason to navigate the challenges of life, accepting what is beyond our control, and focusing on what is within our power to change. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This idea of distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not is central to Stoic thought. The Stoics recognized that we cannot control external events, such as natural disasters, political upheavals, or the actions of others. But we can control our own thoughts, beliefs, and responses to these events. By accepting what is beyond our control and focusing on what we can change, we can cultivate a sense of inner peace and resilience in the face of adversity. Another key aspect of Stoic philosophy is the idea of living in accordance with nature. The Stoics believed that the universe is governed by a rational, benevolent force, and that by aligning ourselves with this natural order, we can find meaning and purpose in life. This means accepting the inevitability of change, embracing the present moment, and recognizing our interconnectedness with all things. As Seneca wrote, "Let us train our minds to desire what the situation demands." By cultivating a mindset of acceptance and adaptability, we can learn to thrive in any circumstance, finding opportunity in adversity and growth in challenge. So, how can we apply these timeless principles to our modern lives? In the next section, we'll explore some practical techniques and exercises for cultivating resilience, inner peace, and personal growth, all drawn from the wisdom of the Stoics. Get ready to put these ideas into action and experience the transformative power of Stoic philosophy firsthand. Practical applications of Stoic teachings. Imagine you're facing a difficult challenge at work, or dealing with a personal setback that has left you feeling overwhelmed and discouraged. In moments like these, it's easy to feel like we've lost control, like we're at the mercy of external events and circumstances. But what if I told you that the Stoics have a solution, a practical framework for navigating life's ups and downs with grace, resilience, and even joy? Enter the Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evils. This powerful exercise involves visualizing potential challenges and setbacks before they occur, and mentally rehearsing how we would respond to them. By anticipating obstacles and preparing ourselves emotionally and mentally, we can reduce their power over us and develop a greater sense of equanimity in the face of adversity. For example, let's say you're nervous about an upcoming job interview. Using the technique of premeditatio malorum, you might imagine yourself in the interview, facing tough questions or unexpected challenges. by visualizing yourself responding with calm, confidence, and poise. You can train your mind to react more positively in the actual situation, reducing anxiety and increasing your chances of success. Another powerful Stoic practice is that of amor fati, or love of fate. This involves accepting and even embracing the challenges and setbacks that life throws our way, recognizing that every obstacle is an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." By cultivating a mindset of amor fati, we can learn to find meaning and purpose in even the most difficult circumstances, using adversity as a catalyst for personal transformation. This might mean reframing a job loss as an opportunity to pursue a new career path, or seeing a relationship breakdown as a chance to build greater self-awareness and emotional resilience. But the Stoics didn't just offer techniques for dealing with adversity. They also emphasized the importance of cultivating gratitude, mindfulness, and a sense of perspective in daily life. One simple exercise is to take time each day to reflect on the things we're grateful for, from the people we love to the small pleasures that brighten our days. By focusing on what we have, rather than what we lack, we can shift our mindset towards one of abundance and contentment. Another powerful practice is that of memento mori, or remembering death. This might sound morbid, but the Stoics saw it as a way of putting our daily struggles and concerns into perspective, reminding us of what truly matters in life. By contemplating our own mortality, we can learn to live each day with greater purpose, presence, and appreciation for the fleeting beauty of existence. As we move on to the next section, we'll explore some of the common misconceptions about Stoicism and see how this ancient philosophy is more relevant and empowering than ever in the modern world. So keep an open mind and get ready to challenge some of your assumptions about what it means to live a good life. Common misconceptions about Stoicism. Picture a person who never shows emotion, who remains unmoved in the face of joy or sorrow, pleasure or pain. Is this the image that comes to mind when you think of a Stoic? If so, you're not alone. Stoicism has long been associated with a kind of cold, unfeeling detachment from the world, a philosophy that encourages us to suppress our emotions and live a life of joyless austerity. But as we've seen throughout this video, nothing could be further from the truth. Far from being a philosophy of emotional repression, Stoicism is a deeply humane and compassionate tradition that emphasizes the importance of cultivating positive emotions like gratitude, empathy, and a sense of connection with others. The Stoics recognized that emotions are a natural and essential part of the human experience, and that trying to eliminate them entirely is not only impossible, but undesirable. So, what do the Stoics really teach about emotions? Rather than seeking to suppress or ignore our feelings, Stoicism encourages us to develop a more mindful and balanced relationship with them. This means learning to observe our emotions without being controlled by them, and cultivating the wisdom to respond to them in a rational and virtuous way. For example, the Stoics recognized that anger is a natural human emotion, but they also saw how it can lead us to act in ways that harm ourselves and others. Rather than simply trying to bottle up our anger or pretend it doesn't exist, the Stoics taught techniques for managing it skillfully, such as taking a step back to gain perspective, examining the root causes of our anger, and finding healthy ways to express it that don't involve lashing out at others. Another common misconception about Stoicism is that it's a purely individualistic philosophy, one that encourages us to focus solely on our own self-improvement at the expense of our relationships and social obligations. But in fact, the Stoics placed a great emphasis on the importance of living in harmony with others and on using our talents and resources to make a positive difference in the world. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee." The Stoics recognize that we are all interconnected and that our individual well-being is inseparable from the well-being of the larger community. By cultivating virtues like justice, kindness, and generosity, we not only improve our own lives, but also contribute to the greater good. So, far from being a cold, detached, or self-centered philosophy, Stoicism is a deeply compassionate and socially engaged tradition that offers a powerful framework for living a life of meaning, purpose, and positive impact. As we move on to the final section of this video, we'll explore how these ancient ideas are being rediscovered and applied in the modern world, and how they can help us navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century with greater clarity, courage, and resilience. Modern relevance and interpretation. Picture a world where technology is advancing at breakneck speed, where social and political upheaval is the norm, and where the pace of change is faster than ever before. In this world of constant disruption and uncertainty, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, anxious, and disconnected from what truly matters. But what if I told you that the wisdom of the ancient Stoics is more relevant and vital than ever in navigating the challenges of modern life? In recent years, there has been a remarkable resurgence of interest in Stoicism, with people from all walks of life turning to this timeless philosophy for guidance and inspiration. From entrepreneurs and executives to athletes and artists, people are discovering that the principles and practices of Stoicism offer a powerful toolkit for living a life of purpose, resilience, and fulfillment in the face of 21st century challenges. One of the key reasons for this renewed interest is that Stoicism is a highly practical philosophy, one that emphasizes the importance of taking action and making positive changes in our lives. Unlike some philosophical traditions that can seem abstract or esoteric, Stoicism offers concrete strategies and techniques for cultivating mental and emotional resilience, developing strong relationships, and making a positive impact in the world. For example, many modern Stoics have found great value in the practice of journaling, which involves taking time each day to reflect on our thoughts, emotions, and actions, and to set intentions for living more purposefully and effectively. By developing a greater sense of self-awareness and clarity, we can make better decisions, communicate more authentically, and build stronger, more meaningful relationships with others. Another area where Stoicism is proving highly relevant is in the realm of leadership and organizational culture. In a world where trust in institutions is at an all-time low, and where toxic workplace cultures are all too common, the Stoic emphasis on integrity, courage, and compassion is more important than ever. By modeling these virtues in our own lives and work, we can help to create more positive, productive, and fulfilling environments for ourselves and others. But perhaps the most powerful testament to the enduring relevance of Stoicism is the way it has helped individuals from all backgrounds to find meaning, purpose, and resilience in the face of adversity. Whether facing a personal crisis, a professional setback, or a global pandemic, people are discovering that the teachings of the Stoics offer a roadmap for navigating uncertainty with grace, courage, and even joy. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca wrote, "The greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it." By embracing the challenges of life as opportunities for growth and self-discovery, we can develop the inner strength and resilience to thrive in any circumstance and to make a positive difference in the world around us. So, as we come to the end of this exploration of Stoicism, I invite you to reflect on how these timeless ideas might be applied in your own life. Whether you're seeking greater clarity and purpose, stronger relationships and communities, or simply a more fulfilling and meaningful existence, the wisdom of the Stoics offers a powerful guide for the journey ahead. As we've seen throughout this video, Stoicism is a philosophy that has stood the test of time, offering a powerful framework for living a life of purpose, resilience, and fulfillment. From its origins in ancient Greece to its modern-day applications, Stoicism has proven to be a timeless guide for navigating the challenges and opportunities of life with grace, courage, and wisdom. At its core, Stoicism teaches us that true happiness and meaning come from within, from cultivating virtue, mastering our thoughts and emotions, and living in harmony with the natural order of the universe. By focusing on what is within our control, accepting what is beyond our control, and finding opportunity in adversity, we can develop the inner strength and resilience to thrive in any circumstance. But Stoicism is more than just a set of abstract principles. It is a deeply practical philosophy that offers concrete tools and techniques for living a more purposeful, effective, and fulfilling life. From the practice of premeditatio malorum and amor fati to the cultivation of gratitude, mindfulness, and perspective, Stoicism provides a rich toolkit for personal growth and transformation. And as we've seen, these ancient ideas are more relevant and vital than ever in the modern world, offering a powerful antidote to the stress, anxiety, and disconnection that so many of us face in our daily lives. By rediscovering and applying the wisdom of the Stoics, we can develop the clarity, courage, and resilience to navigate the challenges of the 21st century with greater ease and effectiveness. But perhaps the most powerful testament to the enduring value of Stoicism is the way it has touched and transformed the lives of individuals from all walks of life, from emperors and statesmen to slaves and freedmen, from ancient times to the present day. By offering a vision of a life well lived, a life of meaning, purpose, and virtue, Stoicism has inspired countless individuals to rise above their circumstances and make a positive difference in the world. So, as we come to the end of this exploration, I encourage you to take the lessons of Stoicism to heart and to start applying them in your own life today. Whether you're facing personal challenges, professional setbacks, or simply the daily stresses and uncertainties of modern life, the wisdom of the Stoics offers a powerful guide for the journey ahead. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." By cultivating that inner strength, by focusing on what is within our control and letting go of what is not, we can find the clarity, courage, and resilience to live a life of purpose, meaning, and joy, no matter what challenges we may face. So thank you for joining me on this journey through the timeless wisdom of Stoicism. May these teachings be a light and a guide on your path, and may they help you to live a life of virtue, resilience, and fulfillment, both now and for all the days to come.